It's Sunday morning, and we are talking about prophecy, the nation of Israel, the end of time. And I've given you a paper here, and we have studied about the beast, which is the ruling world system, and it has to do with Babylon. And then Babylon was overthrown by Persia. Persia in the ancient world was what we call Iran. Let me see if I got a better map to show that. See here. Yeah, here's Iran. This would be Persia, and the Persian Mede Empire. And the Medes, it is believed, they were Europeans that came in and intermarried. They were more like Caucasians, and that was a dual empire, and the Persian Empire was the chief empire. That's why you've got Persia represented as a two-horned ram in the 8th chapter of Daniel, but one horn was longer than the other. That was showing that Persia was in charge, or larger. The longest horn would be Persia, and the shorter horn would be the Medes. I talked to a fellow downtown, and he was a Kurd, and he said they believe that that's a mixture of some of the Europeans that came in to settle down there. And the Kurds they have a king, but they don't have a land area. They mix in here with northern Iran. And of course Iraq, that's ancient Babylon. And you have the Euphrates River running down through it, the Tigris River on the north, and they meet about 100 miles north of the Persian Gulf. This is where we had that Persian Gulf War back in the early 90s. And this is Israel right here. Well, when Israel was not obedient to God, the Babylon, the city of Babylon was built on the Euphrates River, and God he spoke to the mind of the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar. He came over and carried southern Judah away into captivity. Northern Israel was up here was carried away up here by the Assyrians. The Assyrians were Caucasians. You have the Caucasus Mountains between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and they were carried away. Northern Israel was carried away in 722 BC. I'm trying to show you, by giving you this paper, and by aligning what I've studied over these 55 years of study, how this is aligning with Scripture, and how I believe we must be close to the end of time. Let me just go ahead and say this. Persia was overthrew Babylon, and then Persia was Babylon is Iraq, and then Persia was overthrown by Greece. And Babylon was represented in the 7th chapter of Daniel as a lion, and Persia was represented as a bear. And the bear is the largest carnivore in the world. When you're talking about 15 to 1,800 pounds, you're talking about the Kodiak, and talking about the polar bear. Nothing could stand up against them. And the bear was the largest carnivore, and Persia had the largest armies. They would go against their enemies. They went against Carthage, which was an empire back then, with like 2 million or 1.5 million men. 2 million men, that is some kind of an army. So they would go and run over people like a bear. And Greece, Alexander the Great, was considered one of the greatest generals. He had some real weird things that he would do. He did some strange stuff in his tactics in war, and he was like a killing machine. You couldn't stand against him because the way he did. They had this phalanx that they would come up with, and the Romans used it. A phalanx, I think that's the way you spell it. But the phalanx was men in a big square like this. And they would march against someone with their spears out in front of them. And when one fell, one would step up to take his place. And it was really difficult to fight against the phalanx. Well, he did something else. I saw this on the TV one night. They had an Alexander the Great special. And whenever his lines was being attacked by the enemy and they had chariots, he would study the horses instead of how you could stop a chariot. And he found out that if you would open a place in the line for a chariot to come in, he found out the horse would stop. So he'd teach his men to open up like a little garage, Open up the line, it'd come in, stop, and they'd kill the guy and take his chariot. And that's what they said in the special. He had some great ideas. He was very a thinking person, and you wouldn't think that he could whip this big bear, but he did. And that's why he's represented as a leopard. I've studied the leopard, and a leopard is a honed killing machine. That's why this was called the beast. And you find the beast in Daniel 7. And you find the beast over here in Revelation 13. But in Revelation 13, the Bible will speak of the beast as a him or his. The dragon gave him his power, his seat, and his great authority. Well, that's a wrong translation. Well, how do you know, Jim? Well, I look up in my Greek books, and then I go into my interlinear Bible, and it will say it in the interlinear Bible. And the reason you know that, the beast has always been an it. It's not a him, it's not a man. It will have a man of sin that will be leading the beast world system, but it is a world-ruling system. And when they started coming up with when George Bush Sr. came up and started talking about a new world order, the first time I heard him say that, I went, whoa. I had heard about the new world order among a bunch of Baptist scholars. I don't mean the guys at the churches, but through some Baptist guys that would teach in seminary on prophecy. And the word, when it says the beast in Revelation 13, the word is to therion. And then it refers back to the beast. The dragon gave him. The word him is not him. It's the word A-U-T-O-U. Well, autou, it comes from A-U-T-O, which is him. That is him. The word ending gives the character of the gender. But A-U-T-O-U, when you have that, that's the word him, his, in Revelation 13, 2 and 3. When you have him and his, the word is autou. And you go into your Greek books, and they'll tell you that can only be masculine or neuter gender. But it has to follow the gender of the antecedent. A-N-T-E-C-E-D-E-N-T. The antecedent is a noun it's a pronoun usually, that it refers back to a noun or a pronoun. Well, the noun or the subject of the sentence is the beast. Totherion is neuter gender. So therefore, the beast has to refer back to an it, not a him. It's wrong. That's in the King James Bible is him. Look over there real quick. Look over there in Revelation 13. If you look at an interlinear Bible, it won't say him or his. It will say its. And that's one of the things that's wrong with the King James Bible. I use the King James Bible because I believe it comes from the correct text. It comes from the Textus Receptus. I believe in that text. I don't believe in the Westcott and Hort text, which is NIV, RSV. All of these other Bibles is Westcott and Hort. Now he says here in Revelation 13, this is the beast right here. Greece was subjugated. The 4 generals that took Alexander the Great's place, when he died in Babylon around 320, somewhere around there, 320 BC. Now, and 4 generals took his place. Lysachimus, Lysachimus, Cassander, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. The Ptolemies were the Egyptian pharaohs, Egypt. And Seleucus, he's the guy that got the lion's share of Alexander the Great's empire. He wanted to raise it up in the empire to overthrow the Romans, but he never got that strong. He was always starting trouble coming down here. Seleucus was the Syrians, and he was ruling out here, and he was trying to overthrow the Ptolemies in Egypt. I said this before, there's an interesting thing about these guys. When they would start fighting each other, they would marry their daughters over to the enemy in order to keep peace of some kind. Well, a Seleucian daughter up here of the Seleucians, of the Syrians, was a woman named Cleopatra. She was not an Egyptian. She was from Syria. They married her over down into Egypt, trying to stroke those people. That's why Solomon married all those 700 wives and 300 concubines. In all probability, he was trying to make peace with the world, but he didn't need to do that. All he needed to do, according to Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, was just keep God's laws, and they'll go against their enemy one way, and their enemy will flee 7 ways. Now, let me get back to this paper here. What I'm trying to show you is when Israel was carried away captive after Rome subdued these generals who were always trying to raise up a power, particularly Seleucus, Rome subjugated them. And that was the beast with the iron teeth, because it subdued all of these others. And that was the powerhouse of the ancient world. Now, look here. I'll show you this. In verse 13, chapter 13, verse 1, I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea. The beast rising out of the sea, the borders of the beast was on the Mediterranean Sea. That's idiom. That is it's figurative speech. The beast rose up out of the Mediterranean Sea because its borders were on the boundaries of the Mediterranean Sea. You can see the Roman beast here, right here. This is the Roman Empire, all the way over to Spain, to the Rock of Gibraltar and so forth. I want you to learn to understand I've called it the timeline, but it's nothing but the history of Israel. You had in Israel. Israel comes out of Abraham. Abraham comes out of Noah. You had Adam. Then you had the Noah and the flood. And you can find this lineage there in Genesis, the 5th chapter, Genesis 5. And then after the flood, you had these men. You had the sons of Noah migrating. They landed here on the mountains of Ararat, somewhere in eastern Turkey. And the descendants of Ham came down here to the land of Ethiopia and Egypt. The descendants of Shem went up here, and they were the Assyrians or the Caucasians, my cousins, my first cousins. By the way, the most barbaric people who ever lived on the earth were Caucasians, or these Assyrians. They invented all of those methods of killing people, strapping them down in the desert, putting a piece of wet rawhide on their throat, and letting them die slowly because they would strangle slowly as that rawhide would dry up. That wasn't an American Indian invention. It was a bunch of Caucasians that invented that. Just like scalping, that wasn't Indians that did that. We taught them when Columbus landed at San Salvador after he started butchering the natives down there, and it spread throughout America. Now, what I'm talking about here is about Israel's life. They were a nation, and God comes to Abraham, and he is a descendant of Noah. His son Shem received the blessing of God. He was second born. Blessed be the Lord God of Shem. But Japheth dwells in the tents of Shem, and Ham will be the servants of Shem. We get the word Semitic or Shemitic from Shem. Well, this leads on down to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then, of course, Jacob's got 12 sons. His name is changed to Israel. His third son was Levi. Out of Levi would come the priests of Israel. His fourth son was Judah. Out of Judah would become the Lion of Judah, or Jesus, or the Son of David. And, of course, they were carried into captivity in Egypt at the end of Genesis, and that's where Joseph was sold into Egypt. You get into Exodus. This paper has to do with what I'm putting on the board. This has to do with 70 A.D. That's when Titus, the Roman general, came in, slaughtered Jerusalem, just leveled it to the ground. And what we start with on this paper is showing, we tried to show, all this has to go together. Luke 21:24. And it says, this is a theme verse I used to use when I'd travel in the ministry in the mid-late 60s and up into early 70s. This would be my theme verse anytime I went to a church and I was going to start teaching on sovereignty. I'm not sovereignty, on prophecy. I didn't know much back then. I started studying prophecy about 1964, 65, and I've learned a lot since then. Exodus is where God calls Moses to lead the children of Israel, and there's a whole lot of details to this. Moses was called to lead them out, and he goes to them after 40 years quarantining himself because he kills an Egyptian in that 2nd chapter, and he's afraid the word's going to get out, so he goes over to the land of Midian and finds a wife there and so forth. Well, he leads the children of Israel out. They come to the Mount of God, which is Sinai Mount. And it's believed that was down in the southern Sinai Peninsula. I don't have it here. But let me go back to one of these other. I want you to get the idea of what everything is about. Because if you could get a hold of it, and then I can take you into this, then we'll see we have to be close to the end of all things. I don't see how we can't see the end. I may not see it in my lifetime because I don't have that much longer to go. But I believe young people is going to see this world turn into a turmoil. We're in more of a turmoil than people realize. In America. I mean, forget the rest of the world. All right. They go into the mount. God tells Moses, you tell Israel, if they go after other gods, and they don't go after my commandments, I will send the sword, the famine, the pestilence, year after year, and then I'll send the beast to carry them away into captivity. That's what's going on. Israel was in captivity for 2,600 years. 2,600 years. Now, we've studied and we understand that the beast carried them away captive because the time that they were a nation under kings from 1 Samuel to 2 Chronicles, they were always, in 1 and 2 Samuel, they didn't go after Baal in the grove because David was their king from 1 Samuel, the 16th chapter, up through 2 Samuel, the 24th chapter, which covers all of 1 and 2 Samuel. What's going on in 1 and 2 Samuel is Saul was on the throne. The people wanted a king, so God gives them a king in 1 Samuel, the 9th chapter. They cry out for a king in 1 Samuel, the 8th chapter. We want a king. So God says, you'll be sorry for this. He sends Samuel to tell them, you'll be sorry for this. They'll take your daughters, take your sons, put your sons in battle, take your daughters and make them slaves up there in the castle or in the headquarters of the king. And they said, we want one anyway. So they have a king all the way through up to 16th chapter. Well, actually 15th chapter. And Saul is acting up from 13 through 15 of 1 Samuel. And God says, I'm fed up with Saul. Go down to the house of Jesse the Bethlehemite, telling Samuel this. I've chosen me a king among the sons of Jesse. And he goes down there and anoints David, the 8th son of Jesse. And then David is king to 2 Samuel 24. And he steps down from the throne in 1 Kings, the 1st chapter. And then from 1 Kings, we've got the 11th chapter, got the 16th chapter. The 11th chapter, Solomon lets his 700 wives and 300 concubines, 700 wives and 300 concubines, 1,000 women. He lets them, he brings their gods into Israel. He doesn't make it a full-blown sun and tree god worship. He just lets his wives have their gods. Nehemiah, the 13th chapter, Nehemiah said, many strange women seduced Solomon. Strange doesn't mean weird. It means foreign. And they all had sun and tree gods, which, by the way, which is the same thing as Christ, Mass, or Christmas. This is why it's important to understand this, because Christmas is paganism. It's those people there that worship sun and moon goddess. And then in 1 Kings, the 16th chapter, something happens to Israel that's never happened. Ahab finds this crazy woman Jezebel just above Israel in what we call Lebanon. It was called Tyre and Sidon back then, or Phoenicia in the ancient world. And there were two centers for centers, not sinners, centers. There were two centers. They were worshiping sun and tree gods, but there were two places that propagated this more than anywhere in the world, and that was Babylon and Tyre. The Bible speaks against, I'm starting to write Baptist. Same thing. All right. Babylon. And you see a picture in Tyre. Tyre is just Lebanon, right above Israel. And And Ahab marries Jezebel, the prince of Tyre's daughter. And she brings her gods down into Israel. And Ahab sets up in Israel, he sets up temples for Baal in the grove and the sun and the fire and the tree gods, grove and Baal. Well, the Levites, the priests of God, says we can't handle this, so they go south into southern Judah or southern Israel. They're already they're two nations because God split the kingdom because of Solomon's going after, letting his wives go after these. Well, these are the two centers. Even Tyre was founded upon Babylon. Babylon mothered all idolatry. Revelation 17:5 says that. You say, why are you putting this up on the board so many times? Israel was carried away captive because God gets his fill in 2 Kings, the 17th chapter, and says, I'm going to carry northern Israel away captive. He calls in the Assyrian kings. There was a bunch of them. There was a man named, they were all kinds of kings of the Babylonian system and of the Assyrians. The Assyrians, you had a man named Shalmaneser the first, Shalmaneser the second. They had a lot of these guys with the same names. Then you had Tiglath-Pileser. What a name. Don't name your kid that. And Sennacherib. They would never understand you naming your kid Sennacherib Jones. So Sennacherib and other of these Assyrian kings, they carried Israel away. They were in a 10-year siege against Israel. They attacked them for 10 years. Finally, in 722, God carries northern Israel into captivity. And then, of course, Ahab and Jezebel's daughter, simply because the kingdom of southern Judah was ruled by Judah's descendants. Let me see here. Judah's descendants. All right. Here's the beginning of the kings of Israel. Saul, wrong king, wrong tribe. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, but you had to be from Judah according to the 49th chapter of Genesis. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet till Shiloh come. Another name for peace or shalom or Christ. So David, then Solomon his son, and then Ahaz and Hezekiah. Well, wait a minute. That's the no. That's not the right. Oh, here. They've got this one backwards. You got the United Kingdom: Saul, David, Solomon. This right here, I'll show you. Wait a minute. This right here, United Kingdom, doesn't belong above here. It belongs, the United Kingdom with Saul, David, and Solomon belongs right above this, because Solomon's son is Rehoboam, his son is Abijah, and so forth. That's the true lineage of the kings over there. And because of what all these kings did, they kept going after Baal, Grove, Shemash, Molech, and those were the tree and sun goddesses. That's the Christmas tree, whether anybody likes it or not. I am not going to argue about that. That is a fact. Now, what we're talking about this paper, Israel was carried away, northern Israel carried away by the Assyrian kings, not Syria. Syria is a nation. Why did I do that? Let me just make sure you understand this. Assyria is up here between the Caucasus Mountain, and they ruled so much of the world during their empire days. Syria is a nation. Don't confuse Syria with Assyria, okay? Keep that separate. Now, what I'm wanting to show you, southern Judah, because they kept going after all these idol gods, was carried away captive in 586 BC. When Judah is southern Israel is comprised of two of the tribes. I keep setting this down. Southern Israel is comprised, I need another map up here so I can get the one I need. Well, let me show you here. Southern Israel is made up, comprised of Benjamin and Judah. Well, let me show you over here. This is southern Israel, Benjamin and Judah. I've got my own beliefs why Simeon was numbered with northern Israel. I believe it's because Simeon, in that over there in Genesis, he had done something very dishonorable to Israel, and God sticks his tribe down here. He had murdered his sister was having an affair with Hamar's son, Shechem. And this made the tribes angry, and Simeon led that revolt, and I believe that's why he was stuck down here, so that Judah could keep him under control, because he was high-strung and hot-tempered and would just react on the spur of the moment. I believe that's why. I've looked at that and looked at it. Now, here's what I'm getting at. When Israel was carried away, northern Israel and southern Judah, it was this beast that carried them away, and they were passed from Babylon to Persia to Greece to Rome. And all of this because Ahab married Jezebel and brought it all into the kingdom. What happens after? There's a verse that I use, Luke 21:24. The Jews shall fall by the edge of the sword. When did they fall by the edge of the sword? Not to be rescued for 2,600 years. Jerusalem, if you'll notice, Jerusalem is in Benjamin, the land of Benjamin. Jerusalem is not in the land of Judah. You'd think it would be that way since the king has to come out of Judah. Evidently, God wanted it that way, I guess. And since Jerusalem is in the land of Benjamin and the king comes out of Judah, but he'll sit on the throne in Jerusalem. So it's necessary that Benjamin, Saul was the first man king. God was their first king. Saul came from the land of Benjamin. Well, these two right here is southern Israel or southern Judah. These were the last to be carried away. They were carried away in 586 BC. When this happened, Jerusalem was leveled, burnt to the ground. It's really amazing that it wasn't until sometime later, around 444 BC, that the word got to Nehemiah, and he was over in Babylon. He was in Babylon. And it got over there that the wall, his brothers came into town, wherever city he was. He's over there wherever Artaxerxes was, because Artaxerxes, Artaxerxes, before him had been Darius. You had some other kings, but they're not in the Bible. You had Artaxerxes, or Xerxes, the father, Xerxes. You had several other guys that are in between these kings. These are the kings that are biblically what we need to know about. And you had Cyrus. Well, when you get to Artaxerxes down here, Nehemiah's over in Babylon, he gets the word that the walls of Jerusalem are burnt to the ground. It's quite a long time later before he finds that out, 140, 50 years later. So he's the one that God commissions to rebuild the city. And the commission comes from Artaxerxes. Among the Persians, their laws do not alter. Once a decree is made by a Persian king, cannot be changed. The 6th chapter of Daniel tells us that. It cannot be changed. Well, he writes in a letter. This will come in when I review the 70 weeks of Daniel. People try to argue that the decree to rebuild Jerusalem was they'll try to argue in Ezra. Most of them won't go to Ezra, the 7th chapter. But they'll say the decree to rebuild Jerusalem is Ezra 7. That's the third decree. Third decree. And then some will say that it's in Ezra 6. And that's not true either. Because you can't find any decree to rebuild Jerusalem. Some say it's in Ezra, the 1st chapter. Ezra, the 1st chapter. And this is where Cyrus is the king. This is where Darius is the king, Ezra 6. Darius is a Mede king, and Cyrus is a Persian king. But remember, that's a dual empire. And then the 3rd chapter, Artaxerxes is king. But the only place in the Bible where there's a letter written, when a Persian king wrote a letter, if he wrote a letter stating something is going to be done, that was a decree from a Persian king. The only place you find a decree given was in Nehemiah, the 2nd chapter, because in the 1st chapter of Nehemiah, that's where that Nehemiah sees his brothers, his real brothers, coming into town, wherever the king's castle is, coming into town, and they tell Nehemiah, the city is burnt to the ground. Jerusalem is no more. It's the first time he heard about it. He began to weep and cry. That was against the law to do that in the presence of a Persian king. You could die for that. But the only problem was, there was no problem with it. Nehemiah was dear friends with Artaxerxes. He was his cupbearer. A cupbearer, sometimes it will be called a butler. It wasn't a butler that makes sure your tails are straight and your tie's on correctly. That's not a butler. Butler was a cupbearer. Cupbearer was the closest person to a king because he would bring his cup to drink of it. And if the king felt like he was about to be assassinated, he would tell his cupbearer, you drink of it first. If you die, then I won't drink. So they had to be real close. And they were also emasculated. That means castrated. Usually a butler was castrated. In all probability, Nehemiah was a eunuch. That was so they couldn't raise up anything against the king. The king was always protecting. Anyway, those are the 4 decrees. I'm not going to get into that now. But Israel is in captivity when that happens. They go captive into Babylon, then Persia, then Greece, then Rome, and they're carried away captive, and they stay captive for 2,600 years. Jerusalem is leveled. Nehemiah wept about that. Well, you had a temple rebuilt, and people will say, yeah, but Israel was back from the captivity during Jesus' day. No, they weren't. No, they weren't not. During Jesus' day, if this is Israel, and this up here is Lebanon, where Ahab meets Jezebel. He's got a palace up here in Jezreel that's real close to the border. And the palace of the Prince of Tyre is up here just across the border. Somehow, probably Ahab was lonesome some night to hear there's a good-looking woman up here, and somehow he meets her and brings her gods down here into northern Israel, and they make northern Israel, I call it a Roman Catholic state, because Roman Catholicism is where we get Christ's Mass, and that's sun and tree worship, and they bring the sun and bring Catholicism, before it's called Catholicism, down into northern Israel. Well, northern Israel's carried away and southern Judah's carried away, and they're in captivity for all these years. Now the Bible says, Luke 21:24, they, the Jews, shall fall by the edge of the sword. Well, they're falling here. During Jesus' day, only southern Judah was back from the captivity. Northern Israel was called the 10 lost tribes. They never received these decrees. These decrees came to southern Judah to go and rebuild this temple and to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. That's what these decrees were for. And they were given to southern Judah. Now, yes, there were Israelites living there, but what the Pharisees didn't like about northern Israel, when the Assyrians came in to carry Israel away and stay in captivity for 2,600 years until May 14th, 1948, and the temple was destroyed. Jerusalem was in captivity here in 586 BC. And they will fall by the edge of the sword. They will be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the Gentile rule over them is fulfilled. And Jerusalem fell and was never an independent city until the Jordanians were thrown out in the Six-Day War of 1967. All this has to do with the end of time. It's headed our way. And that's what this paper is for. I can't get into everything. The Roman Empire was constantly being attacked by all these barbarians I've given to you before. You've got Israel coming from Abraham, actually tracing back to Adam in the lineage in Genesis, the 5th chapter, and then tracing all the way down to the flood, coming out of the flood, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob's name's changed to Israel, and then you're going all the way through till they become a nation. They do everything that God said don't do there in Leviticus, the 26th chapter, and the 24th chapter of, 28th chapter of Deuteronomy. They're doing everything God says not to do. And he says he's going to scatter them. And he gives them a time of repentance. And I've got to go through that separately. The time of repentance is called the 70 weeks of Daniel. It takes me, the last time I taught on the 70 weeks of Daniel, I did 18 months on Sunday morning and I'd never finished the 70 weeks of Daniel. What is that talking about? All the time they're in captivity, God gives them 70 times 7. That's 490 years. And you're going to find this you're going to find this 70 times 7, and the word is actually Shabuah. It's not weeks. It'll say 70 weeks are determined on thy people. It's not the word weeks, it's the word Shabuah. And Shabuah means sevens. 70 sevens are determined upon Israel to do 6 points out of Daniel 9:24 to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity. And he goes through these, and I'm going to go through that. I've got a paper on that right here. The 6 things are to finish the transgression of Israel, to make an end of sins, and I'll give you a copy of this when I go through it. To make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness. That'll be at the end of time. That'll be at the end of the 70th week. To seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. The most holy at the end of time will not be what it was in the ancient world. The most holy back then was the Holy of Holies. The Ark of the Covenant was here. God came down out of the Shekinah glory cloud, sat on the Ark of the Covenant, and that was Jesus pre-incarnate. And he ruled Israel from there. And the anoint the most holy, this was called the house of God, the most holy. So if you get to the end of time, what else can you say you're anointing when you anoint the most holy? What did I just say it is? It's the house of God. So the house of God will have to be fully anointed. And what is the house of God? Hebrews 3:6 says, Christ is the son of his own house, whose house are we? He lived inside the Holy of Holies, sat there, and that Ark of the Covenant was sprinkled, and our hearts are sprinkled, and the law was written on tables of stone back there, and the law is written on fleshy tables of our hearts. So that'll be the anointing of the most holy. Will be every elect person that's ever lived. The last one will come into the fold, and the end will be here. That's what Revelation 7, 20 and 7 says. It says, not 20 and 7. Gosh, I just went blank here. Look at it over there. I got to give this to you right. This will be the same thing as anointing the most holy right here. I just went blank. I quote this all the time. I don't even know where. 10. 10 and of Revelation. There's an angel comes. He's got the book in his right hand, and let me see here. And when the angel saw that which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth, and lifted up his hand to heaven, verse 5, and swear by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and the things that are therein, and the sea and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer. And then the 7th trumpet sounds. We're going to be changed at the last trump, not at a pre-trib rapture or a mid-trib rapture. And in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, or the 7th messenger, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God, which is the church, according to Ephesians, the 3rd chapter, and Ephesians, the 5th chapter, the church will be finished, will be teleos, will be complete. So if the church is complete here, this is the anointing of the most holy, you and I, and every one of our brothers and sisters that are predestined to conform to his likeness from the beginning of time to the end. This will be the completion of all things, the anointing of the most holy. God will sprinkle his blood on the hearts of the last one coming into the fold. Now, all right. Now, you got these 77s because Israel had a sabbatical year every 7 years. And they had to let the land lie fallow for a whole year. They couldn't touch the land. They couldn't harvest. They couldn't plant. They couldn't reap. They could leave the land there. You can read that in the 25th chapter of Leviticus. They had to leave the land alone so that the poor and the needy could come out, and they could take and pick what grew of itself that year. And you could not touch the land. And the rich people in Israel said, if you think I'm giving up my planting every 7 years, you're out of your mind. And they went for 70 of these sabbatical years and never keeping them. And you can read about The 70 weeks of Daniel, the 70 years, you read about that in the last few verses of 2 Chronicles, the 6th chapter. You can read about it in Zechariah, the 1st chapter. You can read about the 70 weeks in Daniel, the 9th chapter, verse 24 through 27. And you can read about the 70 weeks in the 29th chapter of Jeremiah, and in the 25th chapter of Jeremiah, it'll say God is going to carry Israel away until the land has enjoyed her Sabbaths. You can't plant land every year. You can't do that in America. You will burn the ground up, suck all the nutrients out, and you'll have a tract of land that won't grow anything. I know, I tried it. Me and Mary had a garden over there on Irvin, and we planted it every year until I'd go down and buy jumbo tomatoes, and they would turn out that big. I learned something about planting. You can't do it. And Israel said, we will do it. And God said, I'm not going to destroy you. I'm going to pick you up and move you over to Babylon. And then after 70 years, I'll bring you back. Well, they carried Israel away in 586 BC. And there's a whole lot to this story. I don't have time to go through it. And then the temple was rebuilt in it was finished in 516 BC. Exactly 70 years to the year. 70 years. They wouldn't come back. They stayed over in Babylon. They had gotten fat and sassy in Babylon. The kings let them loose, and they started taking over Babylon. They were everywhere. There was one, Mr. Edersheim says, at one time, there was a throughway or some kind of channel of some sort between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, and the rich Jews lived there in Babylon. Why do they want to go over here to rebuild the temple and rebuild the city when they'd be going to a wasteland? They don't want to. We're not going to do that. What do you think we are, crazy? God says, no, if you don't do that, I'll destroy you. And he did. Now, I want you to see how that all these kings corrupted Israel. I have a hard time figuring out how to give you all these kings. There were 42 kings. Most of them were corrupt to the core. I mean, Israel didn't care about God. People say, why would he do that to them? Because they didn't listen to him. But you know what? Neither does America, do they? America, underneath and in the background, is corrupt. You've got all kinds of systems trying to take over. I was listening to a guy on radio yesterday on one of those religious stations, and he seemed to have a lot of information. He said there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. He said this is a planned program of certain people's, and it's a great big huge organization of trying to bring riots in the streets. It's everything that happened, he was bringing out, that Adolf Hitler brought out when he organized his group of brown shirts, and they were causing all of this havoc. Hitler didn't start in 1939 when he invaded Poland. He'd been stirring up and trying to become chancellor. When he did become chancellor, he became head of the whole thing. This is what this fellow was talking about. He said they've got certain powers that want to get in charge. I keep saying to you, there's this fairness doctrine throughout the world. In most countries, they won't let me preach this message running down Kenneth Copeland, T.D. Jakes, and saying they're liars and thieves. They want everybody being real nice to each other. That's what you come up with when you come up with the same thing that the Catholic Church was founded upon, tolerance. The edict of toleration, everybody getting along. We've got something that's just like that. What is that? Political correctness. We're headed towards this kind of a government. Don't anybody say anything against anybody else. Just everybody smile, get along, and everybody be Christians now, okay? That's what they want us to be. Something's going to happen. I don't know if it'll be in this administration. There's a lot of things. There's a bubbling cauldron in America right now. I don't know. I would like to know a lot more about it, but I either got to study the Bible or study politics. I listen to a little bit of politics, study some of it, just to see what's going on in this nation. I don't believe we're here for long. Now, I've got to bring in, so we've come down to Israel's being in captivity. They're still in captivity during the days of Jesus. The Pharisees will not step foot into northern Israel, because when Assyria carried northern Israel away, they brought their gods in, intermarried them with the gods of northern Israel. And they had a dual worship, Jehovah worship and Baal and Grove worship in northern Israel during the days of the Pharisees. The Pharisees wouldn't put a foot in northern Israel. They would go up here to Tyre and Sidon, a pagan land, but they would cross the Jordan River, walk around it to come to Tyre and Sidon. That's how much the Pharisees hated northern Israel. When Jesus would come down, Jesus wouldn't break the law. The Jews had 3 festivals that all the males had to go to, and that did not exclude Jesus. He never broke the law. They had Passover, Pentecost, and the Day of Ingathering, which was coupled with the Day of Atonement. It was also called the Feast of Huts and the Feast of Tabernacles. Jesus would not break this, but he would come down here to the temple in Benjamin. I wonder why God put Benjamin up there. Isn't that funny? All he had to do, when he gets these Pharisees upset, and at these festivals, the compendia, wonderful set of books, says there could have been as many as 12 million Jews at just the Pentecost of Acts 2. Where would they stay? In tents outside Jerusalem, as far as you could see. They come from all over the world because they had those 3 feasts to come back to. Well, Jesus had to come back to them too. How did he hide from those guys? All he had to do was take a step into the crowd, and God knew how to guide him, and he knew where to go. And all he had to do was cross the line back into northern Israel, anywhere here, and they would not come after Jesus. They could have caught him if they weren't so self-righteous, because they had a dual belief too, didn't they? They had taken the Word of God, translated it over into the Babylonian Aramaic, and translated the Halakha with their Haggadah and their Halakha, which was their opinions. They were as bad or worse, and then what they hated about these northern Israelites. If you listen to my Halakha and Haggadah series, you'll see that. And everybody at Grace and Truth is so. They had a halakha, don't they? That's what they've got down the street at the big Baptist churches, at the Pentecostal churches. They've got an opinion. They just took the Word of God and wrenched it. They don't care that tongue is the word, it's the word glossa or dialectos. They don't care at a Pentecostal church. Glossa is the word foreign language, glossary. We got our word glossary from it. They don't care that Christmas is Christ's Mass. They don't look at it and say, what if that's Christ's Mass? What if that's Catholicism? They don't care. Neither did the Pharisees. That's why when Jesus met the woman at the well of Samaria in northern Israel, he said, you worship you know not what. You've got Jehovah God in it, you got Assyrian gods in it. Now, what I want to do, I have to insert, but I won't insert it today. I've got to insert the barbarians. I got this on the board. I want you to see I think I clicked away from it. This is a map that I got out of the Compendia, Compendia. Great. Get the first two volumes, The Jews in the First Century, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And if you want to get the Compendia, that's what they call it. It's a Latin word. And they've got, I don't remember the exact name, but it's the Jews in the First Century, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And then you've got the Literature of the Sages. This is the oral law, which is the halakha. It'll say halakha on some of them. Some of the books of oral law, halakha, haggadah. And it'll say tosefta, which means in addition to the halakha and so forth. It'll have all of these different titles in their great books. I mean, they're expensive, $100 and something a piece, but put out like gold. They're fantastic. Now, this is a map here of where all the males, they had this in the Compendia. This is like, if you notice, all these maps are pointing towards Jerusalem. This is a map. They give you in the book, give you all about the men coming back to Jerusalem for these feasts right here. And since it was only 50 days between Passover and Pentecost, Pentecost is 50 days after Passover, many of the Jews that lived a long way off, they're traveling by foot or by donkey or something like that. They would stay over between these two festivals. This is speculated as to why the Jews want their own little businesses. People, they get a lot of flack for having their own businesses. That's so they could manipulate their lives to go to these various festivals. They didn't want to come all the way back 50 days later to come all the way back over here to Spain to come back over for the Feast of Tabernacles. This was in the first month. This was in the second month. This was in the 7th month. The 7th month was Tishri. This is the first month, Nisan. This is March, April. And this is September, October, March, April. And then this is in Sivan. And you'll get that out of the Compendia. It's really, really good. If I had to sacrifice to get those books, those are some of my favorite books. Now, all right. I don't know exactly how to tell you all this, but where this takes us to, I'm trying to get you to see the timeline. It's actually the history of Israel, biblical history. But you can't just, so I read the Bible and get it. No, you can't. You cannot do it. Get you a set of McClintock and Strong, get you a set of Hastings, and sit and read them things. Just read articles out of them for the next 15 years or 20. You won't believe what you can find. It's unbelievable. Now, where does this start? Rome, the beast with iron teeth, does not fall until 475 A.D. It was a Germanic tribe of the Germans and the Goths and the Visigoths had mixed by this time. They were all barbaric. I'll show you this. I started to show it to you. All right. Well, I'll get to where I know where here. You can see the barbaric tribes. I'd like to make you a copy of I've got a real good picture of it. But you got the Huns coming from the east. We call the Huns, they come from the east. They settle in Germany. So we called them Huns during World War I. They would talk about the Huns are coming, and they were actually, these pagan tribes is the reason that the Caesar at Rome brings in their gods into his worship, but he had a polluted church. And this thing blended the paganism. I'm going to read you some things out of some material I've got. The paganism blended with Catholicism, just like that. It was like, and you ended up, the Roman Empire is still here in the form of Roman Catholicism. It's just a spiritual kingdom, and it was Constantine. He said, I need something to overthrow these Ostrogoths and Visigoths and Goths and Germanic tribes and Huns and Vandals and all the Franks and Angles. These were tribes, and all the Saxons from the north, and they all worshiped the sun and the tree. So that's when he brings these gods into the church. It's the same thing that Israel went after when they went after Baal in the Grove, which is Christmas, Christ's Mass. Roman Catholicism and the Roman Empire blended together. The Roman Empire here is still here spiritually. Now, what I want to show you, when the Bible says, the Jews shall fall by the edge of the sword, they'll be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentile rule over the Jews is finished. You can go over there in Luke 21, 20 through 24. Now, we're talking about Adam down to, well, my pen quit writing. All right. Adam down to Moses through the flood, down to Israel becoming a nation, and Moses telling them, you go after other gods, you don't keep the laws of God, here's your pay: sword, famine, pestilence, and the beast. That's the world-ruling system. Then they are a nation. They go after these gods they're not supposed to. They're scattered all over the world, and they're not brought back until. Now we see that they were ruled by the beast that carried them away, and they're given these 70 weeks. And through that time is the history of Israel. Now, we know that the beast has ruled back here. From Israel becoming a nation, when they go after these idol gods, they're scattered for that. Which is the same thing as Christmas. Thought I'd keep saying that. But what happens, now they're ruled by Rome in the Bible, aren't they? People say, I've had people say, well, why would God have the beast over here and ruling, and why in the Bible, in the New Testament, was the beast ruling? I don't know who you think Rome is. Well, they were slaughtering the Christians. This is the results of the beast right here. When they say, I don't know who you think is doing this. That's Rome doing that. Killing the Christians, feeding them to the lions, putting them in with the gladiators. They would, earlier in the day, they would put them in with the gladiators until the Caesar got tired. He'd say, okay, put in the others last. That's why Paul said we were last, made a spectacle. Because the last ones, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when Caligula, who started all the circuses more than anybody else, he was a nut. Married his sister, just killed people at will. He kind of really got behind the circus, or the agon. They call it a circus. And in the afternoon, when the Caesar got tired, he said, I'm tired. Put in the last ones. They'd put Christians in with no swords. Earlier in the day, if they put Christians in, they'd give them a sword and say, if you can conquer and kill this killing machine gladiator right here, I'll let you go free. They couldn't kill those guys. But at the end, when it was all over, Paul said, the apostles are last. We're a spectacle. Spectacle is the word theatrizo, or theatron. Theatron means a theater. They went to watch people die. That was their fun, shouting and so forth. Well, Rome ended because they had all this problem among the government. They had the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard was the people supposed to be guarding the Caesar. But when the Caesar got out of hand, the Praetorian Guard would get together and say, let's kill him and put somebody else on the throne. So they'd do that. The Caesars were always murdering each other. One writer said it was a death sentence in the 1st, and 2nd, 3rd century to be made Caesar. There were like, I can't remember the figure, it was like in a 75-year period, there were like 30 Caesars. You're going to die if you become Caesar if you don't walk the chalk line. You are in trouble from the Praetorian Guard or for somebody in the family that wants to be Caesar and he comes and kills you. It was like crazy. Now, but the Rome was still ruling. That's what the early church, from the death of Jesus, now just think, they've been ruled by the beast back to, ruled and abused and killed and persecuted. That's why in the 13th chapter of Luke, Jesus is speaking, he says that Pilate killed so many of the Israelites and offered them up on their own altars in northern Israel. And then he said, suppose you that they were more wicked than you are? Nay, except you repent, you'll all likewise perish. They would come in and slaughter the Jews because the Jews were nothing but a pale to them. They would not settle down. So you come to 70 A.D. Now they have been allowed to be, during the time of Jesus, they're a Roman province. But they were not a nation. Only southern Judah was back. Northern Israel, they all have to come together into one nation. Ezekiel 37 speaks of that when it's talking about the dry bones. And he tells Ezekiel, take one stick for Judah, which is the southern kingdom, and one stick for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim. He was the second born of Joseph. Joseph had the inheritance. He said, take one of each, and they'll become one in my hand at the end of time. That's what they are now. I just want to read off of this and show you. Anybody don't have one of these papers that I passed out? This is Israel. This paper, 70 AD is when Titus, the Roman general, come in. He's the son of Vespasian. Vespasian is the Caesar at that time. In 70 AD, Israel and Rome has been fighting ever since. Israel does not submit to anyone. They say, we're Israel, God is our God, but they weren't acting like it. They were going after other gods. So this paper is about, from 70 A.D., we're talking about coming in right on the tail end of the Roman Empire. Of course, the Roman Empire collapses in 475 A.D. It was a Germanic Gothic. The Goths were barbarian people, but this was a mixture. It was a man named Alaric. He was a Goth, a German Goth. Alaric in 475 came in and did what Constantine was afraid was going to happen. The reason Constantine brought in all these gods of the barbarians was because he thought he was going to lose the empire. And he would have. But it was in 475 that Alaric, the Goth, our son's name Eric comes from that. Eric was the moon worshippers. Yarek is one of the words for moon in the scripture. They worshiped the Lord Moon, and the Lord Moon was androgynous among the pagans. Androgynous means female, male. It was both. And when you go into the Far East, you will see, or even the Middle East, you'll see the Lord Moon represented. It's on the Turk flags. It's all throughout. It's even on the fezzes of the Shriners. And all of that mystery of the shrine traces back to the mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries, back in, when you go, the mystery religions were over here in Rome. I've got a book, and I've read to you from it. It's called Mystery. No, that's Samuel Angus. Is that his name of his? Mystery Religions, Samuel Angus. He'll tell you about the mysteries. You can take a Morals and Dogma, which is the book written by Albert Pike, and it'll have all through it about the mysteries. And they all trace back, and it'll tell you in this book. You can pick one up somewhere. The women are supposed to give these back to the lodge. Most of them don't. You can pick one up at a garage sale or at a used bookstore, and it'll have all about the birthday of Mithra. It'll have about the Feast of Saturn in it. That's Masonic Lodge. It is alive and well in America. Now, how much time do I have, Mike? 15. All right. You kind of got an overlap here from the Jews being scattered and the end of the Roman Empire. The end of the beast was right here in the world, but the beast arises up again in Revelation, and that's a world. Well, what if I put New World Order? That'll be the beast at the end. It's going to have to be a conglomeration. It's going to have to be a mixture. How in the world can these people have a one-world religion? They can't. They got to found it just like Catholicism founded their system. They have to found it on getting along. That's what it's going to have to be. It's going to have to be political correctness. Let everybody be what they want to be. Let the Baptists be what they want and the Buddhists be what they want. And don't fight each other and don't put each other down. That's the fairness doctrine. We cannot telecast in Great Britain, and we cannot telecast in Canada, and we cannot. They've got the fairness doctrine in all of the British Commonwealth. And I couldn't go in there and preach against some other preacher. They all going to get along. And that's political correctness, and that is the doctrine. That's the Edict of Milan in 312 A.D. that Constantine issued and said, we'll get along with all of these Ostrogoths and Visigoths. You know what these are up here? They should call these Baptist Visigoths and call the Germanic tribes, call them Pentecostals, and because what we've done is the same thing they're doing. Same thing. Let's just get along. You can start calling yourself the First Visigoth Baptist Church. Okay? Same thing. Now, this paper takes you from 70 A.D., when Vespasian was emperor and Titus, his son, was his leading general. When Israel, they came in and leveled Jerusalem and carried him off captive again. Of course, only southern Judah was back from the captivity. Let me read some of this. When the Bible says they'll fall by the edge of the sword, they started falling in 586. Jerusalem is trodden down till June 5th, June 10th, 1967. And the Bible says, this is the time when Jesus will come. This generation, or her generation, will not pass away until all is fulfilled. I believe there's a lot of things that we don't know that's going on behind the scenes of the government. Now let me just read some of this, and I may put it on the board. So we're talking about when Jerusalem was carried away, what happened to them up until they became a nation. This is not every little detail. This is just some of the things that I've researched. Jerusalem, city of Salem, or city of peace. Titus, 70 A.D., destruction came to Jerusalem after 143 days. Before the siege, it was concluded, that number is wrong on there. It's not 60 million, it's 600,000. Y'all can change that. 600,000, some say 1,100,000 Jews were slain. And this is according to God's plan. With thousands more led into captivity. No history for 60 years after its destruction in 70 A.D. One last futile and tragic attempt of the Jews to win freedom from the Romans. A rebellion of A.D. 130 by a false Messiah, Jesus Bar Kokhba, overwhelmingly was crushed. What was left of the city was leveled, and the foundations were plowed up. This is what's happening after the time of Christ. 2 years later, the Romans began rebuilding the city and named it Aelia Capitolina. All Jews were excluded for 2 centuries until the reign of Constantine. That's when he puts the Edict of Toleration out and says we're all going to get along. That's the most dangerous thing that ever happened in the history of the church. Tragedy awaited in the wings in history for this city of peace. AD 614. Now you got to remember, 200 years, they wasn't allowed in there. And Constantine issues that Edict of Toleration in 325, or 312 actually. 614 AD. Well, let me read it off the one I marked. Now, 614 AD, a Persian general under King Croesus II seized the city and slaughtered 60,000 Christians. That's a very liberal term when you read something out of a book. It could mean Catholics. And taking 35,000 more Jews into slavery. Now, 14 years later, AD 628, Heraclius made peace with the son of the invader Croesus, entering Jerusalem in triumph. Now, the Jews are being slaughtered at will by these conquerors. And then 9 years later, AD 637. The city capitulated, surrendered to Omar the Caliph, entered into its precincts without bloodshed. Then 51 years later, the Dome of the Rock was erected. A lot of history about this. Don't think this is all there is to it. Dome of the Rock was erected, and that caused this city to be one of the most popular Islamic cities in the world. Anybody who says they're going to go over and reestablish the temple is going to have to level the Islamic people off that Dome of the Rock, and that will be the worst World War III you've ever seen. That's not going to happen. Mohammed, acquainted with the Old Testament, he was acquainted, and the New Testament felt it necessary to be identified with the city. Now it was holy to the Jews, Christians, and Islam. Now when it says Christian, in all probability it means Roman Catholic. The cause of the overthrow. 280 years later, AD 969, Jerusalem fell under the power of Shahi Caliph. The Caliph was the holy prophet of Islam, of Egypt. Then 40 years later, I'm trying to bring out, they fell by the edge of the sword until. And you can go and look these people up on the internet and study them. 1009, 40 years later, Caliph Hakim, son of a Christian, began his devastating work in Jerusalem. That's an awful simple sentence to say that the Jews are going to die like flies in Jerusalem, tortured. 5 years later, 1014, 30,000 churches in Palestine had been pillaged and burnt. 2 years later, AD 1016, persecution stopped only when Hakim, AD 1009, became convinced that he was a god, that he was divine. Then 61 years later, AD 1077, the Seljuk Turks drove out the Egyptians, slaughtering 3,000 residing within the walls. A new era. Pitiful. This is 22 years down the road. Pitiful and sad and shameful dawns. AD 1099, June 7th. Christian army of the first crusades encamps before the city. Christian army, swords and shields, and ridiculous. The city was seized on July 14th, a slaughter pursued by those so-called Christian knights. For 80 years, the city knew no other enemy at its gates but these Christian crusaders. 188 years later, this is kind of sad right here, enters Saladin the Great. You'll hear about him in all kinds of movies. This is 188 years later. AD 1187, September 20th, Saladin encamped, entered on October the 2nd, enforcing strict orders. Here's Saladin the Great. He is the great, probably the most famous leader of the ancient Arab Muslims. Here's his orders. No force of violence or orgy of conquest would be engaged in by his soldiers like those Christian ones back 100 years before. He gave orders. No raping, no pillaging would be engaged in by his soldiers, such as Christian crusaders had engaged in 100 years before. This act of mercy put the Christians to shame. 42 years later, AD 1229, it was regained by Frederick II. 1244, fell again to the Khazarian Turks. Turn over the back. 42 years later, 1247, seized by the Egyptians. This is borne out in Scripture. Luke 21:24, they'll fall by the edge of the sword. Until 1260, recaptured by the Tartars. 257 years later, 1517, this is very significant. 1517, they were seized by the Ottoman Turks and held for 4 centuries. The Turks, the Ottomans, this was an empire. 1517 till 1917. 1517 to 1917. 1917 was the end of World War I. Actually called the Great War. They didn't know there was going to be a World War II, Great War. And then they go under a declaration, 1920. 1920. I think I've got that written on the paper. Let me just read it. October 31st, First World War beginning at the end of God's judgment. General Allenby, a commander of the British forces, entered the city on foot December the 9th, 1917. General Allenby said, "I am not worthy to ride my horse into the town that crucified my Lord." He got off his horse and walked in and took the city. And boy, then we get into a battle until 1948. It's one thing after another. The Arabs, the Balfour Declaration was issued, and I've got copies of that up here. You can go online, look that up. Where was I? After more than 7 centuries, Jerusalem came under the rule of Christian, notice I put that in quotes, conquerors. April 24th, 1920, the mandate for Palestine. It was called Palestine back then. It was called Palestine when I was in elementary school in Texas. It's called Palestine in the 1940s. Didn't become a nation until 1948, so it's not going to be called Israel at least until 1948. And they had to print books after that, so most of the books they printed for school would have Palestine up to about 1949 or 50. She suffered one reverse after another in an attempt to rule this country. The Arabs, they were fighting. That's why they're fighting over there right now. It's all about what Israel did over here in the Old Testament. And during World War II, the final slaughter of 6 million Jews, called the Holocaust, the last sword to cut Israel. Remember, sword, famine, pestilence, beast. The last sword. Where was I? The last sword to cut Israel down was an Assyrian Caucasian named Adolf Hitler. He was doing the will of God and he was murdering Israel. Isn't that amazing? They couldn't even see. Alva McLean in his book, 70 Weeks of Daniel, says the Jews could not see in 1940 while they were being slaughtered and put into those gas chambers over there, and they were being burned alive in Germany in those concentration camps. They could not see Israel becoming a nation just 8 years later. But because of that, I'm out of time, ain't I? Yeah. But because they were killed, Harry Truman got behind all the nations when the end of that decree came up, May 14th, and the National Council met at Tel Aviv, and Truman put the pressure on the world to make Israel a nation. For the first time since they were cut down in the ancient world, 586 BC. It's amazing, but I'm going to get into some of the wars, and let me just read the end of this. May 14, 1948, the British mandate terminated, and between when the mandate, the Balfour Declaration was put out, and when May 14th comes, all of this war between the Arabs, between these Palestinians, which is not what they actually were, all of this war went on from 1920 to 48 for 28 years. And it was one war, one battle after another. With 100,000 Jews in Israel, they were a nation for the first time since 586 BC. The Six-Day War of 1967 gave them their city back. The times of the Gentiles have come to an end of slaughtering the Jews. Amos 9:14. The Jewish nation is back to begin her final 70th week that will end all sin and bring in everlasting righteousness. And then I've got that Luke 21:24 on the very end of it. We're going to resume this next week and get back into a lot of this. I hope this will wake some people up. This generation, when Israel, when they are not cut down anymore, the Bible says her generation will not pass away till all is fulfilled. I hope this scares you. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for truth. I don't know what else to do but what I'm doing, Lord. I pray that the church will get a hold of this, the believers will get a hold of it. Guide us in all that we do. All we know to do is live according to the Word. God will praise you for all things. Lead us in everything we do and fight our battles. We can't fight them. We'll praise you for all things. In Christ's name, amen. Yeah.
The Bible, the Old Testament is physical Israel, and the
We're spiritual Israel. Yeah, that's us. Yeah.
I was wondering.
Well, not a calendar.